This is episode 1 of the Chudstack review. I don't know if I'm going to regret that name. Chudstack. Obviously a play on words. Substack review, Chudstack review. A part of me thinks it's funny, another part of me thinks it's stupid. But for now, let's run with it, okay? So this will be unlike anything else I've done, right? First and foremost, because it's going to be scheduled, right? It's going to come out at the same time once a fortnight, okay? So there will always be an episode of the Chudstack review. Now, I aim to speak to people from Substack about their articles, but if I can't speak to anyone, because it is actually quite difficult for me to find people to speak to often because of the time differences, right? Being in Australia, being in upside down world, like the time zones are completely out of whack. And I'm trying to talk to people from America, from Europe. It's easy when they're from Australia, but there's not as many people to speak to in Australia. That's the truth. So yeah, I'm going to put one out once a fortnight, come hell or high water. And if I can't find anyone to speak to, I will speak myself like I'm doing right now. I'll just speak into a microphone. There will not be a script. It'll be totally unscripted. And I think in some ways that will be better. Like I tried to do a podcast, not last year, but the year before, called Terra Incognita. And it was about the age of exploration. And everything was scripted. So one of the problems with that, right, is that you need to write the script. I mean, in some cases, the script is 10,000 words. That takes a long time to write. And, I need to read a lot of books. Sometimes an episode, I'm reading 3-4 books for a single episode. It's just not sustainable, particularly now that I have kids. And I want to put things out more frequently. Like I really do want to be more active. And I think the only way that's going to happen is if I'm less of a perfectionist. I think another advantage to this is it's actually more natural. Like if something's scripted, it's kind of hard to listen to. I even think about what are the popular podcasts? They are sort of just casual conversations between two people, or they are like this, like a stream of consciousness kind of style. It's just something about it that's easier to listen to than someone reading. So yeah, this will be uploaded to Substack and it will be uploaded to YouTube. Now, I want to directly talk to the YouTube audience, right? Because I've obviously kind of stopped doing YouTube, and that's pretty much because I'm too busy at the moment, right? Like I had twins last year. They're now 1, so I do have a little more time, but I had twins last year, and the process of writing a script, creating a video, writing a script, reading the script, creating the video, finding good video footage, it takes so long. It takes such a long amount of time. And realistically, I just thought it's not feasible. I made, I think, one video, The Faustian Spirit of Western Man. I made one of those last year. But instead, what I did was I focused on writing, okay? I've been uploading essays to Substack. So if you're listening to this on YouTube, you might think I've just disappeared off the face of the earth. But that's not entirely true. I've been writing essays on Substack. I've been putting out 1 or 2 a month. And I've really enjoyed it. I really love Substack. And actually, if you are not on Substack, you should get on Substack because it is the thinking man's social media. I think it's maybe it's what Twitter was like back in the day. I don't know. But, you have an audience that can read, which is probably more than can be said of a lot of social media apps. Like these people are literate, they're smart, they like reading. Yeah, so I would get on it. It's still, we're in February now, so it's not the start of the year, but it's 2026. Maybe one of your goals was hey, I want to stop spending so much time on my phone. Let's be real. That is not going to happen because you're addicted to it. So maybe what you try and do is redirect that addiction away from Twitter, which is a hellish app. I don't know why anyone is still on that app. There's still funny stuff on it, but I find it so depressing to use. So yeah, go on Substack. It's a lot more enjoyable. And Yeah, like I said, I've been writing a lot. So what I thought I would do in this first episode is I would review some of my own essays. I think that is effectively what I'll be doing each fortnight. Is I'll be speaking with someone from Substack, and we'll be going over their essays. So I'm going to go over some of my own. Having kids, right? Obviously, having kids is a very transformative experience. That goes without saying. It's life changing. It's life changing. Yeah, that goes without saying. But I think that one of the interesting ways in which it's changed me is it's definitely narrowed my horizons. You become much more interested in the everyday and practical reality, to be honest with you, because I think people who are interested in politics and philosophy, they're often very idealistic. And you think about that word like etymologically, that's obviously linked to ideas, right? They're interested in ideas and ideals, and they're idealistic. And I think there's something about having kids that makes you very realistic, and you become a little less interested in theory and more interested in practice. And I think that that's something that's totally devoid from a lot of these like theory cells is just like praxis. Okay, cool. What do I do with that information, right? Okay, cool. Carl Schmitt and Pareto and yada yada yada. Elite theory. Now, what do I do with that information? So yeah, that's kind of where my head has been at. One of the themes of my writing has been exploring the tension between idealism and realism. So I'm gonna give me a moment. I'm gonna get this up. I'm gonna get up some of my articles, which I probably should have done before I started recording. I'll start with a recent one. It was called Chesterton's microscope. You've probably all heard of Chesterton's fence, right? So this is basically the idea. You're walking in a field, you see a fence, and the liberal says, "Why is this fence here?" Nobody knows. Well, if nobody knows, let's tear it down, right? There's no reason for the fence, right? Whilst a conservative, even if they don't know what the fence is for, they tend to say, keep it up, because it probably serves a purpose that we're not aware of, right? So it's Chesterton's fence is about epistemic humility, right? You don't know what you don't know. Recognize that. When you see a tradition, it might not make sense, why that tradition exists, but it does actually probably serve a purpose. Okay, so that's Chesterton's fence. You probably know that already. And I've tried to coin my own eponymous principle. It's called Chesterton's microscope, right? And basically, the idea of Chesterton's microscope is, think about a telescope, right? If you look through a telescope, you can suddenly see far away. So things far away suddenly come into focus. But the things in your immediate environment are suddenly out of focus, right? So if you're looking through a telescope, an entire mountain range is suddenly in your field of vision, but your immediate environment is sort of not there, or at least out of focus. But if we think about the microscope, it does the opposite. So it can take something small and make it bigger. And Chesterton's microscope, I'll quote my own piece, if I may be so bold. If I may be so bold to quote my own essay. Chesterton's microscope is the principle that by focusing on small, proximate things, your world actually expands. This principle has cultural, political, and environmental implications. So the reason I call it Chesterton's microscope is there's a quote from his 1905 book called Heretics. And he says, "The telescope makes the world smaller. It is only the microscope that makes it larger." So yeah, again, it's sort of this idea that like by focusing on things in your immediate environment, your world actually gets bigger. Conversely, by focusing on things far away, it sort of becomes smaller, or the things in your environment, immediate environment, are out of focus. And one of the things I talk about in this piece is Jordan Peterson's "Clean Your Room." Now, there's a guy on Substack. I think the Substack's called Metaphor or something like that. and he wrote a piece called We Don't Talk About Jordan Peterson, right? And the point that he makes is like talking about Jordan Peterson, it's like talking about a band that you used to listen to, which has become popular. Like, it's kind of low status. I used to listen to him, but... And like we sort of downplay the amount of influence Peterson had on the culture and on ourselves. Like for me, Peterson had an immense influence, and I'd be kidding myself if I didn't acknowledge that. And I sort of said, the clean your room message was a piece of microscopic advice. It was applying Chesterton's microscope to your life. Like you think about something small, like your bed, like your room. Like an unmade bed in a dirty room is a small thing, who cares? And yet it's actually quite significant when you stop and you think about it, because every single day that's where you wake up. Conversely, like take something big, like is Donald Trump going to invade Greenland? Like that's big. Greenland is a big place and that's a big topic, right? And yet in many, in many real ways, it doesn't really impact you unless, you're from Greenland, right? But that's like, 150,000 people. No one's from fucking Greenland. Anyway, the point is that the big things actually sort of impact you in small ways, often. Whilst the small things impact you in big ways, and that by focusing on the small things, you can sort of make your world bigger. Even I didn't talk about this in the piece, but many seemingly small goals or modest ambitions, like, hey, I want to be a good dad. Like, that might be considered a little small-minded, but actually, when you stop and you think about that, that is a big thing, like being a good father. Or even if you just went and said, I want to be someone who I respect, that I admire, right? And that's a very modest goal. I don't want to look in the mirror and see someone I despise, right? That seems like a very modest goal, but in some sense, it's actually quite ambitious. If you stop and you think about it, it's actually a lot bigger than it seems. In the same way, not to belabor the metaphor, right? But in the same way that everything that you see is actually deceptively big. And it's only by grabbing the microscope do you realize that. Everything is deceptively big, right? So the small things are deceptively big. And that was an essay that I wrote recently. And I think that it sort of maybe helps you see where my head is at, right? I've kind of been moving away, at least for the time being, from big picture thinking. And instead I'm trying to focus on the small things, on praxis. Because like I said, the small things are not small. And with that said, maybe what I'll do now is I'll go to another essay that I wrote. This one is called the Norwood Nietzschian. Actually, you know what? We'll talk about that soon. I want to talk about the 3-step plan for the sensitive young man. So this was the second essay that I wrote on Substack. And basically, I start by talking about the millennial malaise. I'm a millennial. I was born, I just turned 30. So I guess I'm a young millennial or a zillennial. And there is a sort of malaise that characterizes our cohort. And I think Dave Greene said, the millennial is defined by adult disappointment or something like that, right? Like a lot of us are disappointed with adulthood because a lot of the promises that were made to us were broken, okay? So we were told, if you get a good job, yada, 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 you can have a house, have a nice life, go on holiday, so on and so forth. And looking around, when I look around at my own cohort, they are actually a successful cohort, right? So my friends are lawyers and engineers, and yet they all sort of suffer from this arrested development, right? In that they don't have kids, they're not married, they don't own their own homes. They're earning really big salaries, right? They're earning 130, 140K, and yet they still live in a share house. Why is that? In part, it's because property prices in Australia are so prohibitively expensive. If you're from Australia or you listen to me yap from time to time, then you know this, right? Australia, if you look at the top 15 most expensive cities, right? Sydney is number 2. Hong Kong is number one. Now, Hong Kong is a thriving, city state which does like trillions of dollars of export and trades and yada yada yada. It's a financial capital and it's very small. It sort of makes sense why Hong Kong would be so expensive, but Sydney, it's a beautiful place. It kind of makes a little less sense. And then when you look at and you see that Adelaide is in the top 15 most expensive cities, and Perth and Melbourne and Brisbane even maybe, I think. It's like, okay, what's going on here? What the fuck is going on? So basically, like, even if you did everything you were told to do, you've just turned 30, you're earning good money, but your salary does not actually translate to a kind of upper middle class lifestyle. You're earning an upper middle class salary, but you don't have that upper middle class lifestyle. And it's sort of becoming apparent that even if you just wanted to have a kind of a normal boomer life, right? Which isn't very aspirational, but let's say I just want to have a nice home in the city. It's got like a quarter acre. That's a standard Australian dream, right? A quarter acre. Yes, all right. Like, that is actually not accessible to you, even if you're earning really, really good money. Well, it is accessible, but you're going to have to go into extraordinary levels of debt. And my point was in this article that, like, the sensitive young man is not going to want to do that. Like, they're not going to want to get a job where they have to work their ass off just so they can, like, have a kind of normal boomer life. So what does, like, the sensitive young man do? And I kind of lay out a 3-step plan for the sensitive young man, right? And basically my idea was, you want to get a job that is not that demanding, but sort of pays you the same income regardless of where you live. So an example of that might be, let's try and think, it could be a teacher, it could be an accountant, it could be a government bureaucrat, right? Like, the closer it is to a sinecure, the better. So, like, if you can get a job in government being, like, I don't know, an emoji specialist or whatever they do, that's fantastic. But basically the idea is, like, these government jobs, people who work in the public sector, they kind of get paid the same regardless of where they live. So hopefully you can get that. And if it was remote, that would be amazing. You know what I mean? Like, if you could manage to get a remote job. And then my second step in this 3-step plan for the second young man was to move to the country, right? Because obviously the regions are much less expensive than the urban centers. In fact, it's still reasonably affordable. I believe that on a middle-class salary, you can still have a kind of middle-class life in the regions in Australia. That's at least what I've done. Like, I left the city. I have a normie middle-class job that's very good from a work-life balance perspective. And then I do what's called, like, geographic arbitrage, where you're in a place where the property prices are lower, but you sort of earn the same salary that you would if you're in the city. And my third step in the 3-step plan for the sensitive young man was the barbell strategy. So this is one of Nassim Taleb's ideas. Basically, the idea is that, well, think about a barbell. It's called the barbell strategy. Think about a barbell, right? You've got weight on one end and you've got weight on the other, and there's nothing in between. And basically, his point is that when you are, well, I think he was talking about investing, right? So when he's investing, what he does is he's super conservative. So maybe that could be like buying, S&P 500 stock, or buying gold or something like that. A super conservative investment. But then on the other extreme, like on the other side of the barbell, he's investing in extremely risky things that have huge upsides, but are unlikely to be successful. So basically the idea of the barbell is to pair extreme risk with conservatism. So, do the normie job, preferably in government, where it's like really hard to fire you, and then do something extremely risky with a low chance of success, but if it does succeed, has massive upsides. So for me, it's like I said, I have the normie job. I live in the country. I do own my own home, which is actually unusual among my cohort. I do have kids, and I don't have a super stressful job. And that is simply because I don't live in the city, right? So this was the 3-step plan for the sensitive young man. And I don't know, I'd be interested to see what people think about it. Some of you, I imagine you hear this and you go, like, again, I'm thinking about my YouTube audience. Some of my YouTube audience probably hears this and think, like, what is this, man? This isn't Nietzschean. This is like domestic, lame, boring, whatever. But that's a natural segue to our next essay that I want to speak about, which is the Norwood Nietzschian. Forgive me, I should have gotten all these up before I started, but we're doing this in one take and we're not stopping. And I don't care. I'm going to keep this all in because, like I said, I need to get over this perfectionism. And actually, I was thinking, this will probably become a stream. Like, I think I'll do a couple as practice, but eventually I'll become a streamer. And I'm going to be saying, everyone, W's in the chat right now for Russell Walter. And then we're going to, like, I don't know, what do streamers do? They gamble. They do reaction videos. That's going to be me. This is the new content arc. Not really, I'm joking. I fucking hate streaming, but I actually hate streams, especially ones that are like these parasocial, like I come and I hang out with my internet friend and we watch videos together. I'll never do anything like that. It'll always be focused. There'll always be a topic. So this is called the Norwood Nietzschian. And in this essay, what I explore is the conflict between idealism and realism, which has been of interest to me, right? Because you think about the internet, you think about Twitter or YouTube or whatever, and if you're in this sort of like a right-wing adjacent space or philosophy space, whatever you want to call it, you're interested in ideas, you're interested in ideals. But it's very clear that there's a disconnect between the theory and the praxis. And a lot of people, they get all these ideas and then they're like, yeah, but then what? And I just don't hear enough people speaking about the then what. There's a lot of people talking about theory, not enough people talking about reality. And that leads people to a bad situation where they have a totally bifurcated existence, right? Where on one hand, they're like, you know, I'm a Nietzschean. I don't believe in egalitarianism. I believe in hierarchy. And then they work as like an accountant. or you know what I mean? Like or they work in an office, right? And this is genuinely like a substantial portion of the people on Twitter where they just have a totally normal life, but then they have this really extraordinary internal life. And I don't know, this disconnect is very apparent in the followers of BAP, who I consider myself one of them. You know, like, I'm very interested in nature, and by extension, I'm very interested in Bronze Age pervert. But one of the things that's sort of begun to interest me, like okay, so growing up, like, you know, I first read Nietzsche when I was, I think, 18, right? Or 17 or something like that. And I found him very seductive, right? Even though I initially disagreed. Like, I was left-wing when I was in high school. And these thoughts about slave morality, like, I went, they're enticing and they're interesting. And they almost seem true. But if I believed that, my entire worldview would be wrong. Because, like I said, at the time, I think I described myself as an anarcho-syndicalist or something like that. Okay? And I was like, okay, well, if that's true, then all of these ideas about socialism are just total bullshit. It's all just slave morality. And slowly, you know, I kept reading Nietzsche, and I did begin to realize that, hang on a second, maybe it is the case that, like, a lot of my ideas, a lot of my left-wing ideas are just primarily driven by a kind of resentment, right? And it's not that, like, these rich people are evil. It's that I'm not rich, and I hate them for being rich, because they're doing something that I can't do, okay? So this slowly began to dawn on me, and then I found, I think I read Bronze Age mindset in 2020 or something like that. And people go and say, it's just like watered down Nietzsche or something like that. Like, they're very dismissive. It's very much the case that, like, Bap is a Nietzschean and his ideas are a reiteration of Nietzsche. But, like, reiteration is important. Like, I can't remember the quote exactly. It's from that economist, the Keynesian economist. All right, we got it here. So we got Friedrich Hayek. It's the opposite of the Keynesian economist. It's Friedrich Hayek. And he says, if old truths are to retain their hold on men's minds, they must be restated in the language and concepts of successive generations. Okay? So that's what Bap did, and that's no small task. And he did it in a way that was very intoxicating and enticing to a generation of people who were raised on the internet. And I was one of them, right? So this talk about, like, domestication, the domestication of man, it very much spoke to me because in my own life, I felt that way, right? I felt like a domesticated animal, right? And even in that domesticated state, it feels like there's a spark of vitality or something within us. Like, it's not completely snuffed out, but it feels like something about modern life is always threatening to snuff it out, right? It's always threatening to snuff it out. And, in some sense, like, to retain that spark, we need to reject modernity and we need to, not so much return to tradition, that's the opposite, but it's like we need to seek out a more vital way of living than, like, wage labor. Like, and then Bap's, like, exciting alternative was like, let's go do a coup in Africa. Like, that's the subtext. He never says it explicitly, but it's like, you should go into the military, get experience, and then you should be like one of these mercenary groups in Africa, try to take over a state. And, like, it sounds like delusions of grandeur, but that spoke to me. There is really a sense, and I speak to this in the article, there is a sense in your early 20s that anything is possible, right? That's how I felt. I felt like anything is possible, that your life is really a blank slate. Like, you can do amazing things provided you have the will and the imagination. And that's how all great things throughout history have been done, by small groups of men with the will and the imagination. And that's what reading him evoked in me, and that's also what reading Nietzsche evoked in me. And like I said, I was able to live a sort of very normal life and have this sort of and still entertain and nurse these ideas. But, I'm actually getting older. That's the thing, is like I said, I just turned 30. It's called Norwood Nietzschian because I'm a Nietzschean, but I'm beginning to Norwood. The dreaded Norwood Reaper has come, and my hairline is not looking good. It's looking worse every day, okay? And the point is, it sort of starts to become a little ridiculous. The cognitive dissonance begins to kick in, and you begin to go, okay, I'm 30, I work a normie job and I have kids and I'm, fantasizing about, doing a coup in some small African country. That is not going to happen, right? It's just dawned on me, like, that is not going to happen. And I feel like, a lot of people, like, I think this went, like, semi-viral on Twitter. People were clowning on me. Like, someone said that I had trooned out, like I'd become a trans person because I had a family and stopped having these big goals. But I think, like, what I was trying to encourage in the piece, and there was a strategic or rhetorical point to this, was like, I'm being very honest and I'm being upfront about who I am, and I'm recognizing that who I am and who I think I am are very, very different. And I suspect that most of the people on Twitter or in the BAP sphere are in a similar position where they're just nursing these fantasies that will never come to fruition. And then they're just living totally normy lives. And that is dangerous, right? Because if you have the fantasy, and you kind of like, so like you look at normal life, you look at wage cucking, you look at family, you look at all of that and you dismiss it as domestication. But then you don't go and do anything actually extraordinary. So you have contempt for ordinary life, but you yourself are not extraordinary. That's actually kind of worse. Like, you're kind of better off just being a normie at that point. Like, it's better to be a normie, like it's someone with a house and kids and, you know, like a respectable life, than to be like a misanthropic person who, you know, doesn't have a family because that's lame, doesn't have kids because that's lame, but also like doesn't do anything uh, adventurous. And my hunch or my suspicion is that is basically what this is for a lot of people. It's a form of like mental masturbation, right? So that's what the Norwood Nietzschian was about. It was, my hope was to get people to self-reflect on their own lives and maybe start to think like, hang on, is this like, am I actually going to go and do something extraordinary and interesting, or am I just sort of fantasizing about coups and yada yada yada? So I just mentioned family life. So I think what I'll do now is I'll speak about a piece that I wrote. It's called "Is Having a Family Embarrassing Now?" And it's probably good for me to speak about this as well because, like I said, if you follow me on YouTube, you may be wondering where I've been. And when I log back in, which I do occasionally, and look at the comments, a frequent remark is like, where have you gone? Are you still doing anything? Are you still making podcasts? And in large part, the answer is no, because I was focusing on looking after the two new babies. So they were born, I think, in late November 2024. And that coincided with the Wife Jack Wars. Now, if you're not terminally online, you probably don't know what that is, so I'll fill you in. Wife Jack is a meme, right? It's a variant of the Wojak meme. And basically what it is just like an image, cartoon image of a wife. Looks sort of like a Wojak. And she says wife things like, you know, you should buy me flowers, but not right now. It has to be your idea. So it was a pretty, you know, innocuous meme that ended up sparking this online feud. It sort of became like a Rorschach test for how people on the online right view family, marriage, etc. And one of the main partisans in this conflict was Nick Fuentes. So I'll get up the tweet that he made, right? So he saw it as sort of like evidence as like a coordinated effort to neuter the online right. So he went and said, there is clearly an organized campaign to de-radicalize the online right, pushing this "oh shucks, I love my wife" bullshit trash content. And, you know, I was listening to his Rumble streams on this topic because it was sort of out of a morbid curiosity. Like, you know, what does he have to say? And if I could summarize and sort of steelman his position, basically he thinks that, you know, for most men, having a family is the sort of, it's the end of the male life cycle. That's what he would say. You know, most men, you know, they're ambitious, you know, they're radical, and then they get a wife and they get kids and they're de-radicalized and they sort of become complacent. And he saw in this meme complacency, right? A sort of complacency. And a very similar argument was made by Andrew Tate, right? So he said, females aim to domesticate you. They want you monogamous so that your testosterone levels drops. It's suicide for a man's ability to run an empire, right? He described monogamy as a satanic control mechanism opposed on the West to mitigate societal disruption from inferior, low-quality men who wouldn't be able to get a wife otherwise. So basically, his thought is like, without this institution of monogamy, you'll have, you know, high incel rates, and that the institution exists to prevent that from happening. And you know, BAP, if you read BAP, I'll get the quote up as well. In his book Bronze Age Mindset, he said, the necessities of caring for a family and the emotional demands usually blind men to anything higher. At the time, I probably shouldn't have been consuming this content, but I kind of couldn't help consume it because I think a fear that most people have when they become parents is like, does this mean that my ambitions and my hopes and my dreams are now put on the back burner? And of course, to some degree, they are. And even what Fuentes says, like a lot of people would just dismiss it as like incel cope, and they would. And to be fair, I think that a lot of people, the anti-wife jack people, genuinely are just coping, right? It's sour grapes. They couldn't get a wife, they couldn't get kids, even if they tried. And so they lash out at those who do have those things and call them simps and call them wife guys. But there is obviously a kernel of truth to this. It's very clear that like a mortgage, kids, all of these things are very de-radicalizing, right? And that could be a good thing or a bad thing depending on your perspective. And it is also the case that like it's having children's extremely extremely time-consuming thing. So the sort of monomaniacal obsessiveness with a single task, that's not really available to you if you have kids, unless you're going to be like an absentee father, right? Which I think that's more or less what Tate is. So, like I said, most people are simply going to dismiss this line of reasoning. But the fact is, I think that this line of reasoning is compelling to a lot of people. And I would go so far to say that it's actually becoming a part of the zeitgeist. That's the reason this whole Wojak meme is an interesting topic to me. It's interesting to me because it suggests that a large portion of right-wing men increasingly find the prospect of domestic life unappealing. And that's being echoed by right-wing thought leaders or influencers, right? So that is interesting because, I think there's always been a kind of skepticism towards family life on the left, right? I think about some of the books that I read in high school, like books like Death of a Salesman or Revolutionary Road. Now, I don't know if they're strictly speaking left-wing, but I sort of see them as part of a left-wing critique of bourgeois culture, of the nuclear family, boring life in the suburbs, boring job, no creativity. And those critiques resonated with me then. And it's interesting to see those critiques now being expressed by the right, which I think has traditionally sort of defended bourgeois family life. And I think that there actually needs to be a proper response to this. I tried in my own way to sort of respond to the critique being made. I don't know if I did it sufficiently, but I'll try and give you like the too long didn't read version here. Basically, in regards to this whole thing about being able to build an empire and ambition and yada 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 yada, if you think about it, like monogamous cultures, the most monogamous cultures tend to be the most civilized and actually tend to have the most artistic accomplishments. So when Tate says, it's anathema to your capacity to build an empire, it's like, well, we don't have an empire anymore, right? And we're less monogamous than we used to be, right? So it doesn't track. When we were monogamous, like, think about the Victorians. Like, the Victorian is an eponym for monogamy and like sexual prudery. And yet they controlled 1/3 of the world. And you kind of have to think, well, why is that? Why is it that monogamy and civility are linked? And I think, in part, my explanation is Freudian. In the essay I cite a book called Sex and Culture by J.D. Unwin. J.D. Unwin is a Freudian. And his basic idea is that, what happens within a monogamous relationship is that the sexual impulses need to be sublimated because, if you're in a relationship with someone for, let's say, 50 years, a lot of the novelty, like sex is obviously, sexual arousal is linked with novelty. And in a long-term relationship, that novelty does begin to wane over time, which means that, your sexual impulses don't necessarily, they're not able to express themselves in the same way, or they're not constantly stoked and excited. So what happens instead is these impulses need to be transmuted. The word that he uses, that the Freud uses and J.D. Unwin uses, is sublimated. So you need to take that sexual energy and turn it into creative energy. And he thinks that that's basically what goes on, like, among the Victorians, right? They were taking that built up sexual energy and, building railroads and all of these other things. And even when we go and think about like Tate's empire thing, it's like, think about who were the most polygamous people on Earth? I'm pretty sure it's West Africans, right? And where's their empire, right? They don't have an empire. It was, the monogamous Europeans. Now, correlation doesn't equal causation. I don't necessarily think the monogamy is the reason they had their empire, but I just don't buy this line of reasoning. And like, you think about a lot of single men, do they have high thumos? Are they vital? I don't think so. I don't really think so. I think that it's undeniable. Like, I think supposedly it's a scientific fact, right? So I just have to take it at face value. But your testosterone does drop when you have kids, when you get married, maybe even, I'm not sure. But a man's testosterone does drop when he has kids. But I think that ultimately, like, if you're a vital man, like, you will remain so after having kids. But yeah, at the same time, I don't know if that's a sufficient reply. Basically, my main, Dave Greene made this point at the time. My main critique would just be like, look, most guys aren't going to be running empires, right? Most guys are not running empires. Most guys, their main accomplishment in life will be their family, right? Barring that, they will probably leave behind no legacy. It's only the great men, a very small percentage of people who actually leave behind a cultural, political, or military legacy. And for what it's worth, a lot of those guys have kids, For all the examples you could cite of childless philosophers, and there is plenty of childless philosophers, most military men, politicians, artists, most of them do have children. So I'm not sure if I totally buy that line of reasoning, but of course that could be cope, because I'm going to want to think that, right? I don't want to think that marriage and children is the end of a man. Maybe like talking about sublimation and all of that stuff, it's a bit highfalutin. Maybe you could just go and make it more basic, which is like, I think that like dating and sexual escapades and all of these sort of things, like, it's extremely distracting, right? And accomplishing anything is going to require like focus over time. So one of the benefits of being a monogamous relationship is that you spend less time thinking about sex and women, and you probably do spend more time thinking about, a mission, right? So yeah, but I don't know if any of that is really sufficient. One of the comments that I got, which was a critique, it was a comment on both the Chesterton's microscope piece and on this is having a family embarrassing now. This guy basically said, these are just clever arguments for like Ned Flanders conservatism. I think the exact phrase that he used was like, you're reverse engineering Ned Flanders conservatism. I think there is some truth to that, right? Like, Ned Flanders conservatism is probably better for the average guy, right? Than whatever they're getting now from Twitter. Like, do we want like totally normal guys considering themselves like temporarily embarrassed step warlords? Or would it be better for them to just be like normie conservatives, right? Basically, I think what I'm getting at, right, is there needs to be like an esoteric and exoteric doctrine, right? When it, like, politically, there needs to be an esoteric and exoteric doctrine. And I think that someone like BAP, it was meant to sort of be esoteric to a degree. It was meant to speak to a small group of guys, intelligent, high thumos, etc., etc. But what's happened is that message has really spread to a massive audience. And I'm not sure it's helpful for an average kind of conservatively inclined guy to be thinking this way. Because there is something stultifying about modern domestic life. I'll be the first to tell you that, right? There is something stultifying about family life. But then at the same time, it's one of the consolations of life, right? Having a family is one of the consolations of life. Actually being able to experience unconditional love, which I think, I don't know if you can have unconditional love for your partner, your wife, but I do think most people have unconditional love for their children, right? And if you go through your life without ever experiencing that, I think that would be like a sad thing. I think, it's something you can orient your life around. It's something that gives your life a purpose in a very tangible sense. Like, why are you going to work, right? It's for your kids. Like, you're doing what you do for your children. And the great men, that is not going to be sufficient for them. Like a boring domestic family life is not going to be sufficient for them. And they will need to do more. But, most men are not great men. And most men really would be better off just thinking about, having a family, having a normal one, dare I say. So I think I'll talk about one more article before I finish. And I hope that I am doing a good job of weaving this thread. I understand that we're jumping from topic to topic, but I feel like they're all thematically linked, right? So this last one is called Black Pill Detoxification Protocol, and the subtitle is Learned Helplessness and Extremely Online Extremists. Now, the inspiration for this piece is I have a friend, not past tense, who is extremely black-pilled, less so now, but was extremely black-pilled. And I would frequently get into arguments with him, or conversations rather, about the black pill, about the state of the world. Because, if you're reading about, debt and demographic replacement or it could be something like environmental degradation. If you read about these things frequently, these big problems in the world, it's very easy to become demoralized. And the political is personal. I start this piece by basically pointing out that the political is personal. I think that certain temperaments are drawn towards certain ideas. Actually, I don't think that. I know that, right? We know that trait openness is associated with leftism, and we know that conscientiousness is associated with conservatism, right? So we know that different personality types are drawn towards different political worldviews. And we even know that people with certain mental illnesses, right, are drawn towards certain political worldviews. Like you think about the schizophrenic, right? The schizophrenic is sort of naturally inclined towards conspiracy theories because they connect dots that may or may not be there. So the personal is political, and the political is personal. And the political can end up dramatically impacting your personal life. And one of the ways it can do that, I believe, is by bringing about a kind of learned helplessness. Now, I think that most of you are probably acquainted with this idea of learned helplessness, but I'll do a quick refresher, right? So, Martin Seligman, he was a psychologist. He did laboratory experiments, and he went into a laboratory. There's these dogs, right? And basically, they would administer shocks to these dogs. And there was nothing the dogs could do to escape the situation. It was truly helpless, right? So the dogs would get shocked originally, and there was nothing they could do. So their situation was helpless. Now, he went and took those same dogs again, and once again administered shocks. But this time, they could escape the shocks by jumping over a small barrier. Now, what he found was that the dogs, originally when he shocked them, they would thrash about and they would try and get out of the situation. But after a while, they realized the situation is helpless. They stop thrashing about and they just sit down and take it. Now, those same dogs were put in a new situation, right? the shock is still being administered, but now they can escape it, right? It's no longer helpless. And yet, they would just continue to lie down. So the point is that they had learned helplessness, right? They had learned that there was nothing that they could do to change the situation. Now, my contention in this piece is that being extremely online, being an extremely online extremist, sort of breeds learned helplessness, because you are constantly thinking about these big issues, whether it be climate change or demographic replacement or debt and inflation. You're constantly learning it or dealing or thinking about things that you can't really change. And I think that what can sometimes happen is that people can begin to feel like there is nothing they can change, right? So because they spend so long thinking about situations they genuinely can't change, they begin to, they learn helplessness. They begin to think there's nothing they can change, period, right? And basically, I think like learned helplessness is basically identical to depression, right? That's Seligman's point. A lot of the symptoms are the same. So, passivity, cognitive deficits, self-esteem deficits, sadness, hostility and anxiety, loss of appetite, reduced aggression. Like when you observe a animal that has learned helplessness, they basically show all the symptoms of depression. And you can see that in a lot of extremely online guys. In fact, there's a word for it, right? They actually have a word for it. It's the black pill, right? The black pill is learned helplessness. It's the idea that there is nothing you can do. And I think it's a very disempowering and demoralizing worldview, and one that, you need to sort of guard against. I mean, that is the whole point of this piece. I actually end up giving some practical advice, but I think the problem is like a lot of black pilled people, right? They basically think like if you're not black pilled, you're blue pilled, right? It's that you don't have sufficient knowledge of the situation. When in fact, like a lot of white pilled people are people who have actually managed to digest the black pills. Like they realize, okay, perhaps this situation truly is helpless, right? But that does not mean that all situations are helpless. There are things that you can do in your own life still, regardless of what is happening in the world. So, again, this was one of those pieces where some people really resonated with it, other people were critical, but it sort of does link back to the Chesterton's microscope. In fact, I talk about learned helplessness in the Chesterton's microscope piece because, again, let's go back to that telescope metaphor, right? Again, think about it quite literally. Imagine you are looking through a telescope and you see a murder taking place, right? What can you actually do about it, right? It's happening far away. There's nothing you can do, like you could alert the authorities, but by the time they get there, the deed will be done. So I think that like this big picture thinking or this telescopic thinking encourages a kind of learned helplessness. And even when the person puts down the telescope and they see someone right in front of them with a knife, right? They could run, but they've almost learned that the situation is helpless because they've witnessed someone be killed and there was nothing they could do. I hope that that makes sense. So basically this was saying, someone said like, it's kind of, again, a kind of touch grass, focus on what you can control, a kind of stoic message in a way. I actually, I talk about stoicism in the piece. I feel like stoicism, probably because of like all the LinkedIn bros and like, self-help, which is very cringe. Like they evoke stoicism all the time, but I actually think as a sort of philosophical, a philosophical manual for living, stoicism is extremely helpful. So I do talk about this Vietnam War veteran James Stockdale. He spent 8 years in the Hanoi Hilton, I think it's called. And he was tortured. I think he was just tortured mercilessly, put in leg irons for 2 years and put in solitary confinement for 4 years. And yet he never lost faith that he would prevail. I think, so here's a quote from him. "You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be." And that is sort of like the white pill, right? It's like confronting the black pill, confronting the worst truths, but being able to digest those pills and never lose hope that you will prevail, because you cannot afford to lose that hope, right? You cannot afford to lose that hope. And even if it was a delusion, right? A comforting delusion, I think that you need to hold on to it, because pessimism is just so self-fulfilling. I go into actual strategies for dealing with learned helplessness, hence the title, Black Pill Detoxification Protocol. It's supposed to be for someone who feels like they are suffering from learned helplessness. And there are these little strategies which, again, a lot of cynical people, and you are going to be cynical if you have learned helplessness, they'll dismiss this out of hand. But I think the Pentagon gave Seligman like millions and millions of dollars to come up with this protocol. And I think it was special forces, right? This is something that special forces learn. So it's like, if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for you. I don't know if I could be bothered going into it, though. I think you might just need to go to the piece if you want to see that. It's like these 3 strategies, and I think it'll be too hard to explain. So I think I might finish up there, right? So again, I understand that I'm sort of hopping from topic to topic, but there is something that links all of those together. I'm not sure what it is exactly. It's sort of, I guess, to do with a kind of disillusionment. I guess that I've experienced a kind of disillusionment with big picture thinking, and I'm trying like to think about ideas that are empowering on a day-to-day basis. And I suspect that a lot of people will resonate with this, and I suspect a lot of people will not. I mean, that's been reflected in the comments. A lot of people kind of see it as selling out or de-radicalizing, or, you know, to quote that guy, it's like, I've become like a Ned Flanders conservative of sorts. But I don't really care, right? Like, I think that I'm trying to speak to people in a similar position to me, who are kind of, they're sick of big picture thinking. They know the theory, and they're kind of asking, well, what do I do now? And I'm trying to focus more on praxis and how you can actually improve your life, rather than, I don't know, like, do you want to just go and talk about IQ statistics, race and IQ statistics? Is that what we're going to continue to do for years on end? Yeah. So anyway, I think I'll just finish off by, I'll say that for those of you who do watch this and have supported my stuff on YouTube, I am grateful. I appreciate you hanging around. And I'll say that I am somewhat disillusioned with the medium. Like, I feel like, and I'm sort of disillusioned with YouTube a little bit in general. I sort of feel like uploading a video essay to YouTube is kind of like uploading, a lecture on physics to Pornhub. Like, it's just not the place. Part of me thinks that way, but then there's another part of me where I'm like, I built up this pretty big audience. It's like 30,000 people, and it would be a shame to just to not do anything about it and to stop posting, So this is my way of saying that I am coming back. I am going to be putting out content frequently, right? Like I said, once every 2 weeks. Now, it's not going to be perfectly scripted. It's going to be like this. It's going to be off the cuff, or it's going to be an interview, right? Because that's what I can do frequently. I can't do video essays frequently. I just haven't got the time. So if you could give me feedback on this, any feedback would be appreciated. And also another request, if you could please subscribe to my YouTube. It's one of those things where it really doesn't take you very long. I mean, if you've gotten to this point in the podcast, it takes maybe 5 minutes to set up an account. As I've said, Substack is a way better way to spend your time than Twitter. So if you could make an account and follow me there and maybe read and like or comment on the pieces, I'd really appreciate that. And for those of you who have been listening for a long time and would like to support the work that I'm doing, I'd really appreciate a paid subscription. If you think back to the 3-step plan for the sensitive young man, if you think back to the barbell strategy, I don't even think I finished that point, right? But for me, the barbell strategy is, I have my normie job, which is very safe, and then I'm doing this, you know what I mean? Like I am writing, I'm creating things. I do plan to ultimately write a book. That is like a high risk strategy, right? The chances of payoff are low, but for me, it's like extremely encouraging, right? It's actually, to some extent, it's not about the money. Like when I see that someone's willing to make a small contribution every month, like it's extremely encouraging for me. And it really does motivate me to do this, right? Because, I would love, I have no illusions. I don't think I'm going to ever be a true like full-time creative. I think it will always be a part-time thing. But even if I could earn enough just to work less, right? Just to work less, that would be huge for me. So, please do consider it. That would, it means the world to me. It really does. And like I said, I will be putting out things more frequently. A lot of it will be behind a paywall. So, one of the things that's good about paywalls is you can actually speak a lot more candidly behind a paywall than you can when anyone can access it. But anyway, thank you so much for listening. I really do appreciate it. Thank you for your patience. And if you're listening on YouTube, thank you for your patience and thank you for listening. Alright, see you later.